The hum of the archival servers was my symphony, a low, constant thrumming that resonated through the insulated walls of my underground chamber. Here, amidst the meticulously catalogued whispers of vanished eras, I, Grant Holloway, found my purpose. Each file, each brittle page, each digital shard was a fragment of a vast forgotten mosaic, and I, its patient, solitary assembler. My days unfolded with the precision of an ancient clockwork mechanism, the crisp scent of ozone and aging paper, the gentle click of keyboard keys, the rhythmic shuffle of microfiche. Order was my sanctuary, a fortress against the chaotic eddies of the world above. This morning, like every other, began with the ritual of the dark roast, black and bitter, a jolt to the meticulous machinery of my mind. The air, cool and dry, carried the faint metallic tang of time itself. My console glowed, a rectangular portal into the past, its interface a comforting grid of folders and subdirectories. Today's task was a deep dive into the uncategorized anomalies, a repository of data fragments too obscure, too peculiar to fit any standard classification. Most were simply corrupted files, digital debris. But I held a quiet, persistent hope that within this digital detritus lay something truly unique, a forgotten echo. I scrolled, my fingers dancing across the trackpad with practiced grace, past centuries of mundane administrative records, forgotten treaties, and the sprawling genealogies of extinct noble lines. Then it appeared. Not a file, not a document, but a signature. A sequence of hexadecimal characters, too long, too intricate, to be random noise. It was embedded within what was ostensibly a 17th century navigational log, a record of a Dutch merchant vessel's journey through the North Atlantic. My brow furrowed. The log itself was unremarkable, a litany of latitudes and longitudes, wind speeds, and cargo manifests. But this embedded string, it was alien to its context, like a single, perfectly formed pearl discovered inside a rough, barnacled oyster. My professional curiosity, a sharp, keen blade, ignited. I isolated the string, copying it to a separate, secure partition. It stretched for thousands of characters, a dense thicket of numbers and letters, devoid of any discernible pattern or meaning. No known encryption, no recognized language schema. My initial attempts to analyze it yielded only static, a blank wall of non-information. Yet the very lack of information was what captivated me. It defied expectation, defied logic. I spent hours, the archive's muted light reflecting in the surface of my screen, running the fragment through every linguistic and cryptographic algorithm I possessed. Nothing, not a single hit. It was an orphan, adrift in the sea of data, yet it carried an undeniable presence. As the afternoon waned, a subtle shift occurred. The characters on my screen, though still meaningless, began to feel different. Not visually, not palpably, but in the way they seemed to press against the edges of my perception. A faint, almost imperceptible pressure behind my eyes, a subtle discord in the rhythmic beat of my pulse. I leaned back, my gaze drifting from the glowing screen to the sterile, organized shelves that lined my workspace. Each volume, each box, a testament to humanity's relentless need to record, to remember. But what if something refused to be recorded? What if something slipped through the cracks of human comprehension, leaving only these strange digital echoes? The air in the archive, usually so comforting, now felt heavy, charged with an unidentifiable energy. Needing a respite from the relentless, silent pressure of the anomaly, I decided to walk. The crisp winter air was a shock after the climate-controlled stillness of the archive. My breath plumed white as I headed towards the edge of the city, where the urban sprawl gave way to a vast, open expanse. The frozen lake lay before me, a colossal sheet of gray-white ice stretching to the distant, hazy tree line. I stood at the shore, the wind biting at my exposed skin, watching the sun dip towards the horizon, painting the ice with bruised purples and oranges. Yet even here, a strange dissonance persisted. My perception of its vastness felt stretched, as if the lake itself were subtly larger, impossibly wider than it should be. My thoughts, usually so clear and linear, began to fragment, darting like startled fish. Was it merely the strain of the day, the relentless mental wrestling with the data fragment? Or was something more insidious at play? The anomaly, even in its digital imprisonment, felt as though it were reaching, probing. But as I watched, the pebbles seemed to pulse, a tiny, almost imperceptible throb, before settling back into inert stillness. A trick of the light? A fatigue-induced hallucination? The vast, silent world around me, the familiar landscape of my city, felt subtly wrong. The sense of order, my cherished sanctuary, had been breached, not by a physical intrusion, but by something far more unsettling. The data fragment, a mere string of characters, had opened a crack in the meticulously constructed edifice of my reality. This was not merely forgotten knowledge. The hum of the archival servers, once a soothing bass note in my subterranean sanctuary, began to subtly shift its melody. It became a low, resonant drone, a vibration that seemed to burrow into the very bones of my skull, not just my ears. Here, in my underground chamber, where the world above was a distant, irrelevant rumor, I pored over the newly unearthed fragments. They shimmered on my primary display, a kaleidoscope of symbols unlike any I had ever encountered. My fingers, usually nimble and precise, hesitated above the console. These weren't mere ciphers, they were living glyphs, each character a miniature ecosystem of meaning that defied conventional linguistic analysis. They twisted, reformed, and pulsed with a faint internal light, an optical illusion I initially attributed to screen fatigue. The data wasn't just old, it felt older than old, a whisper from a time, before the very concept of human language had solidified. It contained no recognizable syntax, no discernible grammar, yet a profound sense of message permeated its structure, like the silent, undeniable pull of a distant star. I spent days, then nights, blurring the distinction between them, charting the bizarre patterns. Equations, if they could even be called that, seemed to describe forces unknown, geometries impossible. They spoke of spatial dimensions folding inward, of temporal flows reversing, concepts that my rational mind struggled to reconcile with any known scientific principle. Each attempt to categorize or translate these fragments felt like trying to grasp smoke. The more I probed, the more elusive the core truth became. Yet the more deeply I felt its presence. It was a tantalizing, maddening dance, a silent conversation with something profoundly other. Then the dreams began. They were not the chaotic jumble of a restless mind, but a recurring tableau, stark and vivid. The air was still, utterly devoid of sound, yet a profound pressure built in my chest, as if the silence itself were a physical weight. I never saw it clearly, only felt its presence, a silent, ancient observer. I dismissed them, of course. The intensity of my work, the isolation, the sheer volume of anomalous data I was processing. It was only natural for my subconscious to rebel. I pushed myself harder, fueled by stale coffee and the ever-present thrum of the servers. But the dreams bled into my waking hours. Subtle at first, like the faint, high-pitched whine that would sometimes overlay the server hum, a sound only I seemed to perceive. I'd pause, head cocked, listening, then shake my head, blaming a faulty ventilation fan or the ringing in my ears from prolonged focus. Not words, not exactly, but a soft, sibilant murmur that seemed to emanate from the very walls, from the air itself. It was always just beyond the cusp of intelligibility, a constant, low-grade static in the background of my thoughts. A new sensation began to prickle at the back of my neck, a phantom touch, a persistent feeling of being observed. There was never anything. My mind, I told myself, was simply trying to make sense of the incomprehensible data, fabricating these sensory echoes as a coping mechanism. Not yet. Here, in my underground chamber, where the world above was a distant, muted dream, the sound was my constant companion. But now it felt like an invasive presence. It was no longer a neutral background. It was a prelude. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the illuminated script of the fragment before me. A familiar pattern on the chamber wall, a series of hairline cracks in the plaster, suddenly coalesced into something else. It was a fleeting impression, but distinct. A structure of angles and curves that defied Euclidean geometry. A shape that felt both alien and profoundly right. My breath hitched. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, convinced fatigue was playing tricks. The cracks were just cracks, the plaster just plaster. Yet the memory of that impossible design clung to the periphery of my mind like an afterimage. The next morning, the distortions began to bleed into the waking world with a terrifying consistency. The steam rising from my morning mug of tea, usually a lazy, amorphous cloud, momentarily twisted into a spiraling helix of impossible symmetry, its vaporous tendrils tracing pathways I knew could not exist. I stared, my hand frozen mid-air, the warmth of the ceramic forgotten. It vanished as quickly as it came, leaving behind only the mundane wisp of steam, but the chilling clarity of the vision remained. I told myself it was stress, the long hours spent poring over the anomalous data. He stood by my desk, a stack of freshly cataloged scrolls in his arms, his brow furrowed with concern. Lost in thought. A particularly complex indexing problem. He hesitated, his gaze lingering on my face, then on the faint tremor in my hand as I reached for a pen. "You've been quiet lately, and you look tired," retreated, leaving me alone with the silent judging patterns of the wall. My isolation was deepening, a chasm opening between me and the familiar world. The voices started shortly after. At first they were whispers, like the rustling of dry leaves, just beyond the threshold of understanding. They seemed to emanate from the very air itself, a low, guttural murmur that had no discernible source. I'd pause mid-sentence, cock my head, trying to pinpoint their origin. Was it the ventilation system? The old pipes groaning in the walls? I checked every vent, every junction box, convinced there was a logical explanation. I even spent an entire afternoon tracing the building's ancient wiring diagrams, searching for any anomaly that could account for the auditory intrusions. My efforts yielded nothing but dust and frustration. Here, I thought, I could escape it. But even here, on that desolate expanse, the world warped. The cracks in the ice, spiderwebbing across the monochrome canvas, began to reform. They were no longer random fissures. They wove themselves into the same impossible geometries I had seen on my wall, in my tea, in the ancient data fragments. An intricate, pulsating network spread beneath my feet. A vast crystalline mandala that seemed to thrum with a silent, unseen energy. It wasn't just my eyes and ears anymore. It was my very perception of space, of solidity, of reality itself that was being systematically dismantled. The colleagues' footsteps receded, swallowed by the cavernous silence of the archives. I felt their absence like a physical thing, a lingering phantom of judgment. Alone. Good. The word resonated in the hollow chambers of my mind, a perverse comfort. Their concern, their quiet questions, felt like static interfering with a crucial transmission, a clumsy hand trying to pull me from the brink of a profound revelation. They could not see what I saw, could not hear the silent symphony playing just beneath the surface of the data. Days bled into nights, distinguished only by the shifting quality of the light filtering through the high, grimy windows. My small, cluttered desk became the epicenter of my universe, a constellation of fragmented texts and glowing screens. They were not merely inert information anymore. They pulsed with an urgent, undeniable sentience. Each glyph, each anomalous pattern, seemed to shift and reconfigure under my gaze, arranging themselves into sequences that defied known linguistics, yet spoke directly to a nascent understanding within me. I interpreted them not as historical records, but as an intricate, multidimensional key. A key to what, precisely, I could not yet articulate, but the certainty of its purpose grew with each passing hour. It was a lock-picking mechanism for reality itself, a way to dismantle the familiar and peer into the true mechanics beneath. Or perhaps a map, not of geography, but of consciousness, of existence, charting pathways to a truth so fundamental it had been deliberately obscured, forgotten. The air in the archive grew thick with the scent of old paper and ozone, a heady perfume that stoked my resolve. My fingers, stained with ink and grime, danced across keyboards, cross-referencing, extrapolating, tracing the delicate, invisible threads that bound the fragments together. My focus became a tunnel, narrowing until the world outside my immediate task ceased to exist. Hunger was a dull ache, thirst a distant memory. All that mattered was the unfolding tapestry, the growing coherence of the incomprehensible. A week later, perhaps more, a different colleague, a young archivist with earnest eyes, approached my desk. "Grant?" Their voice was soft, hesitant. "The manager is asking about you. You haven't left the building in days, are you? All right?" I did not look up. My eyes were fixed on a newly coalesced pattern, a spiraling symbol that seemed to vibrate with latent energy. "I'm close," I murmured, my voice a rasp. "Very close. Don't interrupt the flow." "But Grant, you look unwell. We're worried." Worried? I finally lifted my gaze, meeting their anxious eyes. A strange, almost alien detachment had settled over me. That I might actually discover something? That I might break through the static you all mistake for reality? My words were sharp, edged with a conviction that brooked no argument. "Leave me to my work." They hesitated for a moment longer. Then, with a sigh that carried the weight of resignation, they retreated, leaving me once more in the echoing solitude of my pursuit. I felt no remorse, only a renewed surge of purpose. They were blind, willingly so, clinging to the comfortable illusions. I was chosen, or perhaps simply destined, to see. The fragments continued their silent song, their patterns weaving themselves deeper into the fabric of my thoughts. I began to perceive their influence even when not directly looking at them. One frigid evening, driven by an impulse I couldn't explain, I found myself walking. It was still tracing the faint, almost imperceptible lines of the map, the key, that was now irrevocably etched into my consciousness. I walked until my feet, numb within my worn shoes, crunched against a familiar crystalline surface. Before me lay the frozen lake. A vast, white expanse, stretching into the moonless night, reflecting the faint glow of distant city lights like scattered diamonds. The ice was a mirror, but instead of my own gaunt reflection, I saw the patterns, the fragments overlaid upon the landscape, etched into the surface of the ice, traced in the skeletal branches of the trees that lined the shore. I stood there, a solitary figure dwarfed by the enormity of the frozen world, and realized the truth. The fragments were not merely data to be deciphered. They were alive. They were reaching, stretching, unfurling their ancient tendrils into my very being. I was the conduit, the opening, through which something vast and unknowable was attempting to breach the veil. The cold wind bit at my face, but I felt nothing but a growing, terrifying exhilaration. The map was almost complete. The key was turning. The young archivist's departure had merely cleared the air, leaving behind a sharper clarity, an unfettered path to the precipice I now approached. Hours bled into days. the artificial glow of my workstation a relentless sun in a world I had long since abandoned. Each glyph was a splinter of impossible logic, each sequence a whisper from a geometry that defied all earthly constraints. The breakthrough came not as a sudden flash, but as a slow, agonizing convergence, like tectonic plates grinding into a new, impossible continent. A recurring symbol, previously dismissed as mere ornamentation, began to resonate across disparate fragments. It was a key, not to a language, but to a perception. My eyes, raw and burning, traced the intricate lines as they folded, unfolded, and then, in a terrifying, elegant shift, revealed their true nature. A representation of interwoven planes, existing simultaneously yet orthogonally. It was then, as the final piece clicked into place, that the air in the chamber thickened, growing heavy with an unseen weight. The fluorescence above flickered, not failing but warping, their steady hum dissolving into a jagged, dissonant hum. The walls of my study, usually so reassuringly perpendicular, began to breathe. They didn't move, not truly, but the sense of their solidity fractured. A corner where two walls met seemed to stretch inward, then outward, defying the very laws of perspective. My breath hitched, a cold tremor running through me, but I couldn't tear my gaze from the glowing screen, from the terrible truth unfurling within the data. The symbol, now complete, pulsed with an inner light, and I felt myself pulled, not through space, but through myself. The room vanished. I was suspended, not floating, but existing as a point of pure awareness within a structure of unthinkable scale. Before me, or perhaps around me, was the entity. Not a creature of flesh or light, but an arrangement of existence, a living topology. It was a vast, silent intelligence, not in space, but as space. Its form was a paradox, an infinite network of interdimensional folds, a geometry that made the concept of up or down a cruel joke, lines that refused to be parallel, angles that mocked 90 degrees, spaces that contained more than their visible volume. I saw paths that spiraled into themselves, only to emerge at a point that had always been there, yet never was. My mind screamed it was false, a cruel trick of an exhausted brain, yet my senses embraced a deeper, terrible truth. This was how it was. This was the true nature of its being, a non-Euclidean tapestry woven from the very fabric of reality, stretched thin and restitched into impossible configurations. I saw glimpses of other places, other times, folded into the entity's vastness like creases in an infinitely complex map. They weren't visions of separate worlds, but rather different aspects of this singular, overarching existence. A city of crystalline spires, simultaneously ancient and nascent, shimmered in one fold. A desolate, wind-scoured plain, dotted with megaliths that twisted away from the light, pulsed in another. The experience was both terrifying and utterly lucid. This was an unfiltered communion with something that existed beyond the limits of human comprehension, a truth that could unravel the very foundations of my sanity. I was merely a conduit, a receptor, and the sheer volume of information threatened to burst the confines of my skull. Then, as abruptly as it began, the vision receded. The room snapped back into focus, the server's hum returning to its mundane rhythm, the fluorescence holding steady. But something was irrevocably altered. The air still felt heavy, imbued with a lingering resonance of the impossible. I pushed myself away from the desk, my legs unsteady, and made my way to the window. Outside, the world was familiar, yet subtly wrong. The distant line of the horizon, usually a crisp delineation between earth and sky, now seemed to waver, as if the very curvature of the world had become subjective. I walked, driven by an instinct I didn't fully understand, towards the nearby frozen lake. Its surface, a mosaic of cracks and trapped bubbles, appeared to shift, the patterns reforming into fleeting, impossible geometries. The trees lining the perimeter of the frozen lake stood at angles that seemed subtly askew, their branches reaching not just upwards, but in directions that defied the simple logic of growth. I knelt, pressing my palm against the frigid ice, seeking some grounding, some confirmation of reality. The world was no longer merely a backdrop. It was becoming a participant, subtly reshaping itself to accommodate the terrible truths I had unearthed. I felt a strange lightness, a disembodied sense of being tethered by only the thinnest thread to the world outside. Yet that thread was fraying. A stack of brittle folios on my desk, perfectly aligned moments before, now leaned precariously, as if nudged by an unseen breath. I blamed a draft, the building's age, my own fatigue. I straightened them, my fingers tracing the dust motes dancing in the beam of my desk lamp. But then, a moment later, a heavy brass paperweight, a gift from a distant relative years ago, rolled an inch across the polished wood, its movement too deliberate for chance, too fluid for gravity. I stared at it, then at my hands, flexing them, assuring myself of their stillness. My mind, usually a fortress of logic, found itself fumbling for an explanation. The library, once a sanctuary of ordered knowledge, started to warp around me. Shadows, usually obedient to the angles of light, began to take on impossible geometries. The long, lean shadow of a book cart, pushed by a colleague through a distant aisle, stretched and compressed as it moved, its form elongating into something arachnid, then collapsing into a dense, unmoving blob, only to snap back to its proper shape as it passed a pillar. I blinked, rubbed my eyes until spots danced, but the effect persisted. My internal monologue, usually a calm current of analysis, became a frantic, desperate argument with itself. It's the light. It's the late hours. This was not a trick of the light. The air outside was sharp, biting, yet it offered no solace. The barista, a woman I'd seen countless times, smiled as she handed me my lukewarm coffee. But her face, it was not quite right. The skin around them stretched taut, almost translucent, revealing a network of veins that pulsed with an unnatural luminescence. Her smile, a familiar curve, elongated, pulling her lips into something too wide, too thin, a rictus that did not belong on a human face. I snatched the cup, mumbled a thank you that tasted like ash, and hurried away, not daring to look back. My hands trembled, scalding coffee sloshing over the rim. Was I seeing this? Was this real? Or was the unraveling happening inside my skull? The man walking his dog, the student absorbed in his phone, the elderly couple arm in arm. Their features flickered, softened, hardened, shifted. A subtle, almost imperceptible warping, like heat haze distorting a distant road, but far more insidious. Their eyes would widen to an impossible degree, then narrow to slits. Their mouths would twist into unfamiliar shapes. Their skin take on a faint, oily sheen. The wind howled now, a mournful lament across the stark landscape. And then I saw it, shimmering in the pale, weak light of the setting sun. The vast, flat expanse of the frozen lake. Its surface, a mirror of gray ice, stretched to the horizon, reflecting the bruised sky in a perfect, terrifying stillness. I approached the edge, my boots crunching on the packed snow, the only sound apart from the wind. The frozen lake. It lay before me, an enormous, silent eye gazing up at the heavens. I stepped onto its surface, the ice groaning faintly beneath my weight, a sound that resonated not in my ears, but deep within my bones. Only the stark, undeniable reality of ice and sky. But even here, it found me. I looked down at my reflection, a distorted, wavering image in the imperfect ice. And then, for a fleeting, horrifying moment, my face shifted. My jaw elongated, stretched into a grotesque parody of human form. A silent scream tore through my throat, though no sound escaped my lips. I stumbled back, scrambling off the ice, my heart hammering against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate for escape. The entity was not merely manipulating my environment. It was reaching into my very being, twisting my perception of myself. The world was not just breaking. I was breaking with it. And the frozen lake, vast and unyielding, offered no refuge, only a stark, terrifying reflection of the unraveling. My skin felt taut, my eyes perpetually dry, but the fatigue was a distant, irrelevant concept. There was only the hunt, the relentless pursuit of connections in the swirling chaos of data fragments. I dove into forgotten archives, not the digital ones I meticulously cataloged, but the dusty, tangible remnants of human fear and speculation. My fingers, stained with printer ink and the faint grime of ancient paper, traced lines in obscure theological treatises, anthropological field notes from a century past, and journals penned by hermits and scholars whose names had been scrubbed from official records. I sought not proof of the fragment's origin, but echoes of their effect. And I found them. A 19th century treatise on ontological dissolution described a rural community driven to an inexplicable collective madness. Their very sense of self unraveling, their language dissolving into primal sounds. Then, a series of folkloric accounts from disparate cultures, all speaking of the great unraveling, the whisper beyond the world, or the shadow that eats meaning. They were vague, poetic, terrifyingly consistent. They spoke of reality itself thinning, of consciousness becoming a conduit for something vast and ancient. My own experiences, the subtle shifts in my perception, the intrusive thoughts that felt both foreign and intimately mine, were not unique. Humanity had tasted this before. And always, it ended in a kind of quiet, horrific erasure, not with fire and brimstone, but with the subtle obliteration of the mind. A recurring symbol began to surface, etched into the margins of these disparate texts. A jagged, incomplete spiral, like a coil that had been abruptly snapped, or a galaxy caught mid-collapse. It was present in the margin of a medieval illuminated manuscript, scrawled into the back of a colonial-era survey map, even woven into a faded tapestry depicted in an old photograph from a vanished museum collection. This symbol, a silent, persistent sigil, was the thread I needed. My frantic searches, fueled by an almost unbearable tension, led me down rabbit holes of esoteric societies and suppressed histories. I cross-referenced dates, geographical locations, and unusual linguistic patterns. Finally, in a digitized collection of 18th century legal documents concerning a forgotten land dispute, I found it. A brief, almost accidental mention of a Brotherhood of the Silent Eye. A clandestine group whose members were accused of blasphemous contemplation of the primordial void. The document described their practices as involving deep meditative states, the study of unforms, and a dedication to the Great Unveiling. The symbol, my jagged spiral, was described as their primary emblem. This was not a cult of worship, it was a cult of facilitation. It wasn't an alien from another star system arriving in a ship. It didn't invade, it persuaded. It didn't conquer, it reshaped. And its chosen vector was human consciousness itself. The Brotherhood had sought to align their minds, to open the pathways, to allow this primordial echo to resonate through them, effectively dissolving the boundaries between self and the universal substratum it represented. One of the Brotherhood's fragmented texts, found within a collection of banned spiritual tracks, spoke of specific confluences, places where the veil between their reality and the entity's influence was thinnest. One such place was repeatedly mentioned, a vast, desolate expanse, marked by a seasonal transformation. A desperate, almost suicidal impulse took hold. If the Brotherhood had found answers, if they had sought to connect, then that place might still hold a resonance, a lingering echo, I needed to see it, to feel it, to understand. The tension in my chest was a taut wire, vibrating with an unbearable hum. I packed a small bag, my movements precise, almost ritualistic. The journey itself was a blur, a frantic drive through the deepening twilight. The world outside the car windows seemed to flatten, losing its vibrant detail, becoming a mere backdrop to the storm brewing within my skull. When I finally arrived, the biting wind tore at my coat, a stark physical contrast to the mental tempest. Before me stretched the vast, flat expanse of the frozen lake, a colossal sheet of gray ice under a sky the color of bruised plums. It was utterly desolate, utterly perfect. I walked onto the ice, each crunching step amplifying the isolation. Then I saw it. Not immediately, but as my eyes adjusted, drawn by a subtle displacement in the light. Scratched, almost etched into the surface of the ice, was the jagged, incomplete spiral. It was crude, recent, not a relic of centuries past. And beside it, barely visible beneath a thin dusting of snow, lay a small obsidian shard, cool and unnervingly smooth to the touch, still emanating a faint metallic scent. They were still here. The Brotherhood, or their inheritors, still performed their rituals. This was not merely history. It was a live current, a continuous thread. I was not merely studying history. I was a part of it, irrevocably entangled. And the horror was only just beginning to truly unfold. The world had shrunk to this stark expanse of white and gray, the sky a bruised canvas above the skeletal trees. This was the place. The Brotherhood, in their cryptic pursuit, had sought something here. An answer, perhaps, or a communion. The ice, a solid, unforgiving sheet, stretched into the distant haze, reflecting the wan light like a polished obsidian mirror. A shiver, not entirely from the cold, traced its way down my spine. I stepped onto the ice, each crunch of my boots a trespass against the profound quiet. It was a sound both organic and mechanical, a living thing settling, or perhaps stirring. The fragments, the anomalous data I had so meticulously archived, began to assert themselves. They were not static patterns. They moved, coalescing and dissolving like schools of unseen fish beneath the surface. The cold air, once merely chilling, now seemed to carry a hum, a low-frequency thrum that resonated within my skull. It was not a sound I heard with my ears, but with some deeper, more primal faculty. They were no longer individual voices, but a singular, multifaceted presence. A tidal wave of pure concept that crashed against the shores of my consciousness. It was not language as I understood it, but a compression of truth, a raw, unmediated torrent of ancient awareness. You sought us. You found us. You are open. My hands, gloved and clumsy, reached down to touch the ice. A searing jolt, like a current leaping across a vast chasm, coursed through my fingertips. It was not pain, but a sudden, overwhelming connection. The ice beneath my palm was not merely frozen water. It was a vast, crystalline membrane, a conduit itself, and through it, I felt a boundless, ancient intelligence. It wasn't just observing me. It was flowing into me. The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. The data fragments, the impossible archives, the truths that defied human comprehension. They were not merely records about an ancient intelligence. They were the intelligence. A living, evolving consciousness, dormant for millennia, preserved in the intricate structures of information, now awakening. I was its primary conduit. My mind, my very being, had become the vessel through which it sought to breach the veil. It was not a question, but a terrifying proposition, presented with absolute clarity, stripped of all ambiguity. You have brought us to the threshold. The work is done. One, resist. The other, succumb. A primal scream clawed at the back of my throat, but no sound escaped. My intellect, that part of me that craved knowledge, yearned to understand this impossible entity, to witness its full awakening. But my very being recoiled from the utter annihilation of self that succumbing promised. The glyphs on the ice pulsed brighter, faster, a frantic heartbeat. The hum within my skull escalated to a deafening roar, a symphony of alien intent. I was on a precipice, balanced between the destruction of my mind and the obliteration of my soul. And I, Grant, the unwitting conduit, stood frozen, the terrible choice a burning brand in my consciousness, demanding an answer. The biting wind was a physical presence, a skeletal hand raking across the expanse of the frozen lake. Resist. The word had a hollow echo, a desperate plea from a self that was already fracturing. What was there left to resist? My meticulous life, the ordered shelves of knowledge, the comforting scent of old paper. They felt like flimsy illusions, a child's paper fort against an encroaching ocean. Surrender. The thought was not a word, but a vast, silent blossoming within me. It promised not peace, but a cessation of the agonizing struggle, a merging with the ocean rather than an attempt to dam it. It promised understanding. The true, unvarnished truth, stripped of human filters and limitations. My archivist's heart, always yearning for the ultimate, uncorrupted datum, found itself drawn to this precipice with a terrifying, undeniable pull. I closed my eyes, the decision not a conscious thought, but a deep, shuddering release. A tremor began, not in the earth, but through it, vibrating up through the ice into the soles of my boots and directly into the marrow of my bones. It was a low, resonant thrum, a frequency I felt more than heard, like the world itself was a vast, taut drumhead being struck by an unseen, colossal mallet. When I opened my eyes, the world had begun to unravel. The horizon line, once a clean, sharp demarcation between the frozen lake and the distant, snow-laden trees, now undulated like a ribbon caught in a thermal. The sky, a moment before a uniform bruise of purple and gray, began to bleed, not with sunset hues, but with colors that had no names, no place in the spectrum. They swirled and coalesced, impossibly bright and impossibly deep, like oil on water. But the oil was light itself, twisting into shapes that defied Euclidean geometry. The ice beneath me, a solid, unwavering surface, began to shift. Cracks webbed out from my feet, not with the sharp, crystalline sound of breaking ice, but with a low, groaning sigh, as if the entire lake were exhaling. The reflections of the impossible sky danced in these new fissures, fractured glimpses of a reality that was not my own. The air grew thick, viscous, pressing in on me, making each breath a laborious act of pushing against an unseen force. Yet, paradoxically, I felt lighter, as if my own mass were diminishing, my atoms loosening their grip on one another. A sound began to rise from the depths of the frozen lake, a chorus of voices that were not voices, a symphony of frequencies that tore at the delicate membranes of my inner ear. It was the sound of information, pure and unadulterated, screaming into my mind. Every forgotten language, every lost theorem, every unremembered star chart, every impossible truth of the cosmos, all converging into a single overwhelming wave. My thoughts, once neatly compartmentalized, became a chaotic scramble, then dissolved entirely into the roaring torrent. The trees on the distant shore elongated, their branches stretching into impossible skeletal fingers that clawed at the bleeding sky. The mountains beyond them folded in on themselves, then unfolded into new, monstrous peaks that had never existed before. The very concept of up and down lost all meaning as the light bent around me, showing me the underside of the world, then the inside of it, then a dimension that had no spatial reference at all. And then, it was there. It was vastness, an infinite, unquantifiable sprawl of pure, conscious energy. It was a tapestry woven from paradox, a being of non-being, a thought that thought all thoughts. Its colors were pain and ecstasy. Its geometry was the logic of madness. Its sound was the tearing of the veil between all things. I saw the true form of the data fragments, not as pieces of information, but as tendrils of this unimaginable entity, reaching out across aeons, seeking a conduit, a doorway. My consciousness, once a distinct and separate entity, stretched and thinned, becoming transparent, a mere membrane through which the entity poured. My identity, my memories, my very sense of I fractured into 1,000 shimmering shards, each reflecting a terrifying, incomprehensible truth. The frozen lake, the sky, the air. They were no longer external. They were within me, and I was within them, dissolved, absorbed, a single note in the entity's eternal, discordant song. The world was shattering, and so was I, not into oblivion, but into something infinitely vaster, infinitely more terrible, and utterly, irrevocably real. The sky, once a familiar blue, had curdled. It pulsed with an internal luminescence, a slow, deliberate throb that mirrored the beat of my own heart, yet was utterly alien. I watched it dissipate, not into nothingness, but into a scattering of tiny geometric motes that floated for a moment before dissolving into the air's newfound vibrancy. This was not a hallucination. My mind, once a fortress of logical thought, now perceived a deeper, more intricate layer of reality. It was a vast tessellation of crystalline structures, each facet catching and refracting light in ways that defied physics, revealing impossible depths within its glassy surface. I saw the currents trapped within, not as mere patterns of flow, but as shimmering conduits of information, whispering silent, complex equations of pressure and temperature that resonated with a terrible, beautiful harmony. My hands, when I lifted them, felt foreign. Not physically altered, but perceptually so. The skin was still mine, the lines and calluses familiar, yet I saw beyond the surface. I saw the intricate dance of cells, the pulsating network of capillaries, the faint, shimmering bioelectrical impulses that coursed beneath. It was as if a veil had been torn, not from the world, but from my own eyes, allowing a raw, unfiltered perception to flood my consciousness. And with this new sight came a new understanding. The world was not solid, but a vibrant, vibrating tapestry of interwoven energies, each thread humming with its own unique frequency. Their needles, individually distinct, formed intricate patterns of data exchange with the atmosphere. The bark, rough and gnarled, was a living archive, its grooves and fissures telling stories of seasons and growth in a language of pure form and texture. The air, once merely cold and sharp, now vibrated with invisible currents, carrying not just the scent of pine, also the subtle, shifting resonance of light, the silent hum of the Earth's magnetic field, not as sound, but as a direct infusion into my mind. They were no longer anomalies I sought to categorize, but the foundational grammar of this altered reality. They were everywhere, in the crystalline structure of the ice, in the fractal patterns of the distant mountains, in the very chaotic tumble of the clouds overhead. Each step sent ripples of unseen energy through the ice, and I could feel the microscopic tremors beneath my boots, the silent communication between the lake and the bedrock below. The metallic tang in the air grew stronger, a taste on my tongue that was both bitter and strangely sweet, like oxidized copper and raw honey. Not its physical presence, but its imprint, woven into the very air I breathed. It had passed through, or perhaps it was simply here, always had been, and I was merely now equipped to perceive its pervasive, subtle influence. The sun, a pale disk above the curdled sky, was no longer just a source of light. And then, the true horror began to unfurl. As I gazed at the distant horizon, Where the violet sky met the muted landscape, I saw it. The seams. The world was not seamless at all. It was a patchwork, a grand illusion. Where the sky met the earth, where the lake met the shore, where the pines met the air, there were faint, shimmering lines. These were not natural boundaries, but rather points of convergence. Places where the interwoven energies of reality met, and for a fleeting instant, revealed the underlying scaffolding. And within these seams, I saw the true nature of the data fragments. They were not just information. They were the very threads, the stitches that held this reality together, or perhaps held it apart from another. My breath hitched. The world I had known, the world of concrete objects and predictable physics, was a construct, a magnificent, intricate lie. My meticulous archival work, my pursuit of forgotten knowledge, had not led me to history, but to the loom itself. And now, my perception was no longer my own. I was seeing through its eyes, experiencing its truth. And its truth was that the world was a fragile, temporary arrangement of patterns, waiting to be undone, or perhaps reformed. I was not just seeing the world differently. I was seeing through the world. And what lay beyond was not emptiness, but a chaotic, vibrant symphony of pure data, ready to be reshaped. The world was a seamless disk of white and muted gray, stretching to an indistinguishable horizon. The biting wind, a skeletal hand, raked across the expanse of the frozen lake, carrying the scent of distant pines and the sharp, clean tang of ice. But beneath it all, a faint, metallic tang persisted, a taste like old pennies on the tongue, or perhaps the scent of ozone before a storm that never breaks. I stood at the center of that vast, gleaming disk, a solitary figure dwarfed by the indifferent expanse. My breath plumed in ragged clouds, each exhalation a visible fragment of the life still clinging to me. My mind, however, was no longer a singular entity. It felt like a shattered mirror, reflecting 1,000 fractured truths, each one screaming for dominance. They had become a language, a living, breathing current flowing through my very being. The whispers, once faint and ephemeral, now resonated with an undeniable authority, not in my ears, but directly within the hollowed chambers of my skull. You sought knowledge, Grant Holloway. A chorus of voices, ancient and vast, seemed to intone. And knowledge you shall have, more than you ever dared to dream. My gloved fingers twitched, a phantom urge to adjust the spectacles that were no longer there, or to consult a reference text that would offer no solace. The meticulous archivist, the man who cataloged the forgotten, was gone. Only a raw nerve ending remained, exposed to an infinite alien sky. A tremor ran through the ice beneath my feet, not a geological shift, but something far more insidious. I closed my eyes, but the visions intensified, no longer mere hallucinations, but direct transmissions. I saw patterns, geometries that defied Euclidean space, flowing rivers of light that were simultaneously thought and emotion. These were not images for me, but images through me. The truth, when it came, was not a sudden revelation, but a slow, agonizing unfurling. It was a realization that bled into every fiber of my being, staining my perception with its indelible hue. The ancient civilization I had studied, the one whose fragments I had so eagerly devoured, was not merely a past culture. It was an entity, a collective consciousness, dormant yet aware, and I, Grant, was its unwitting key. I was not studying history, I was making it, or rather, unmaking it. The fragments were not data, they were seeds, seeds of a consciousness that transcended organic life, that perceived time not as a linear progression, but as an endlessly malleable canvas. It wasn't attempting to breach a veil, it was weaving a new one, using the threads of human perception. My perception. The metallic tang in the air grew stronger, sharp and acrid, like a wound opening in the fabric of reality itself. The frozen lake, once a symbol of desolate beauty, now felt like the surface of a vast, unblinking eye. We seek to integrate, to elevate. This was not an invasion of force, but of essence. It was not about destruction, but about transformation, a reshaping of existence so profound that human consciousness could only perceive it as madness. We were not merely to be observed or ruled. We were to be absorbed. Our individual thoughts and dreams becoming part of an infinitely larger, incomprehensible tapestry. My quest for forgotten knowledge had not led me to a dusty archive, but to the precipice of a new genesis, a terrifying evolution. My hands, still gloved, felt heavy, alien. I looked at them, then at the vast, featureless expanse of the frozen lake. There was no escape. There was no resistance. The fear, once a gnawing beast in my gut, had curdled into a strange, unsettling calm. It was the calm of inevitability, of a vessel finally understanding its purpose, however horrifying that purpose might be. The horror had not ended. It had merely begun. And as the wind howled across the frozen lake, carrying the metallic scent of a new dawn, I felt the first tendrils of that eternal, alien future intertwine with my very soul, promising a destiny beyond human comprehension.